Today's lesson is names of ionic compounds, and you will need a periodic table, your periodic table of ions, and your polyatomic ion chart. So before we get started on that, yesterday you were given an assignment where you had to write the formula of a compound given the name. So here I have the answer key to that assignment. So I'm not going to go over each one in detail, and you can pause the video, get your assignment, check your answers, or just take a screenshot if you want. So for the answers for each one of these, I've done them according to the steps that I gave you. So I've put in the ion name with its charge, the ion formula with its charge, cross the charges. If we have ones, we don't have to write the ones. So potassium bromide is KBr. For iron Roman numeral 3 chloride, this Roman numeral 3 means the charge of the iron ion is a 3+. Chloride -1, cross your charges, 1 to 3, FeCl3. For aluminum sulfate, remember if a compound ends in ATE or ITE, that means that it has a polyatomic ion. Aluminum is a 3+ ion. We look on our chart for sulfate, and we have SO4 with the 2- charge. Remember, we cross to the outside of any parentheses, and then we reduce to lowest whole number ratio if necessary. Here it's not necessary, so we write our final formula, just the symbols and the subscripts. No charges end up in the final formula. And here we have 2 polyatomic ions. Because we end up with subscripts of 1s, we do not need to put the parentheses. If you have them, that's fine, but this is how you will see it if you see it in a textbook or anywhere else. Okay, and remember, if your subscript outside of the parentheses is not a 1, anything else, you must have your parentheses. One of the most common mistakes I see is, for some reason, students not putting the parentheses around hydroxide, the OH, when your subscript is more than 1. All right, and then for the rest of the problems, here they are. So again, take a screenshot or pause the video. So I did make a mistake here. So these are out of order, number 10, number 11, and let's see, number 13. Let's move that up so you can see that. So sodium bicarbonate, Na+, the bicarbonate ion is HCO3 with a -1 charge. Cross your charges, 1 and 1. We do not need to put parentheses for that. All right, so now we are going to move on to the object of today's lesson. So we want to be able to write the name of the compound from the formula. But this is for when we have compounds beginning with an element to the left of the staircase or beginning with NH4. So these are mainly ionic compounds. And we are going to split these compounds into 2 categories so that we can write the proper name. So we'll go over that right now. All right, so, oops, there we go. We have category 1 and category 2. Let's divide our paper in half. All right, so for category 1, we are going to be writing the names for compounds beginning with a type 1 metal. Compounds beginning with type 1 metal element, hydrogen, or NH4. All right, so what do we mean by a type 1 metal? Let's review that. So type 1 metal, so first of all it's metals. They are metals that only have cations with a single charge. So these form cations with a single charge. And they are group 1. So from our periodic table, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium, and francium. Group 2. So beryllium, magnesium, etc., etc. And what is called the slide. And the slide is aluminum, which is always a 3+ ion. Slide down catacorner to zinc, it's always a 2+ ion. Slide down catacorner to silver, that's always a +1 ion. So our category 1 has one of these metals at the beginning, or hydrogen at the front of the compound, or beginning with NH4. All right, so now for these category 1, this is the important thing. We do not need a Roman numeral in the name. And we're going to see that it's going to be really easy to write names for our category 1 compounds. Category 2, it's going to take a little more work, but that's okay. We're chemistry honors students, we can do it. All right, so for our second category, these are compounds beginning with a type 2 metal element. All right, so these are any metal that's not type 1. That's simple as that. Any metal's not type 1. So for these are our D block, F block, P block, except for the slide. So these are the P, D, and F block metals, except for the slide that we just went over. Aluminum, zinc, and silver, they're P and D block elements, but they are type 2. So our type 2 elements, these form cations with 2 or more different charges, and that depends on the compound. And the important thing for category 2 is you need a Roman numeral in the name. So that is why writing the names of these compounds are going to take a little more work, because we have to figure out what the Roman numeral is to be able to put it in the name. All right, so as we did yesterday, we're going to write the rules and then we'll do some examples. All right, so we're going to do our category 1 formula to name. And this is the rule. We have one rule. Write the cation name, then the anion name. And that is it. So let's do an example. So our example, if we have the formula Mg3N2, and we want to say the name of that compound. Okay, so it's an ionic compound, begins with the metal, so that means that these Mgs, the three of them, they are magnesium ions. The name of the cation is the same as the element, so the name is magnesium. So that's the cation name. Now let's write the anion name. So we have the nitrogen ion, and remember that our anions end in IDE, so nitrogen becomes nitride. And that is it. There's our answer, magnesium nitride. We don't have to worry about what the charges are. We don't have to worry about what these subscripts are. All we have to do, magnesium nitride, boom, we're done. All right, let's do another example. If we have K2SO4, all right, so we look at our cation, K, that's for potassium. And then SO4, this is a group. Our formula does not show it in parentheses, but we could go ahead and put in those parentheses if we wanted to. So we have one sulfate group. Well, I know it's sulfate, but when you see the SO4, you're going to look at your polyatomic ion chart. Here it is, and you're going to find where you have an SO4. You don't have to worry about the charge. Right now, you're just looking for the SO4, and we see that SO4 is sulfate. That is the name of that polyatomic ion. So we write that down, and that's our name. We're done. Potassium sulfate. All right, let's do another example. So NH4Cl. All right, so now N is to the right of the staircase. However, if we look at this NH4, if the N is followed by an H4, that is the ammonium ion, and this falls into category 1. This is an ionic compound, so we just have to write the name of that ion. So you check your polyatomic ion chart, NH4, this is ammonium. And chlorine as an ion is the chloride ion, ending in IDE. And that's it. We're done. Easy as that. All right, let's do another one. So if you have Zn, parentheses, ClO4, parentheses 2. So Zn is zinc. Zinc is part of the slide. And then ClO4, this is a polyatomic ion. That's where you check your chart. And we can see that ClO4, the name is perchlorate. And we just write the name down, perchlorate. All right, and we'll just show one with hydrogen. We have HI. All right, so hydrogen is not a metal, but hydrogen is in our category 1. So when hydrogen is in the front of the compound, it's a +1 ion, so its name is just hydrogen. Just like sodium would just be the sodium ion, hydrogen. Then I, the iodine as an ion is iodide. So that name is hydrogen iodide. Whoops, I went off the paper. Hydrogen iodide. So that's easy, right? All right, now we're going to move on to category 2. Category 2 formula. Oops, I forgot the 2. Category 2 formula to name. All right, so we're just going to have to do a few more steps, and I'll do the example as we do the steps so you can kind of see how this works. All right, so for this one, step 1, we're going to write the cation name. And we're going to leave an open parentheses. Then you're going to write the anion name. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'll give all the rules and then do an example because I used up all the page. All right, number 2. We're going to box the formula unit. Okay, and I'll do an example where I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. Number 3, we're going to set the sum of the charges of all the ions to 0. 4, we're going to add all the negative charges. Add all the negative charges, and we're going to figure out the positive charge needed in total for each ion. And then our last step, 5, we're going to put the charge of the cation as a Roman numeral in the parentheses. Okay, so now we'll do an example following these steps. So our formula that we're going to do, our example, we're going to look at PbS2. Now, first thing to do, when you look at our first element, lead, and we look at where it is on the periodic table. It is not in group 1, it is not in group 2, it is not in the slide, so that means it needs a Roman numeral. So we're going to write our cation name, so Pb is lead. We're going to leave an open parentheses for our Roman numeral, and then we're going to write our anion name. So when we have sulfur as an ion, it is sulfide. Okay, now we're going to box the formula unit. What does that mean? We're going to look at our formula, and our formula tells us how many ions of each element we have. So this means we have one lead ion, Pb, and it's something plus something. We don't know what the charge is. That's what we're trying to figure out. And our formula tells us we have 2 sulfide ions, SS. Sulfide, look on your chart, is a 2- ion. So our formula, actually, even though we don't show charges in the formula, we have ions in our formula unit. So that's our box. What is in the formula? Now, we're going to set the sum equal to 0 because the charge of the compound itself is 0. Positive and negatives all have to add up to 0. Okay, we're going to add the negative charges. -2 and -2 is -4. And now for our positive charge has to equal a +4 for this to equal 0. We only have one lead ion, so this lead ion must be a +4. It has to be a +4. 4 is IV, so now we put that into our parentheses. This 4 means that is the charge of the lead ion in the compound. Lead, Roman numeral 4, sulfide. We don't have any 4s in the subscripts of our formula because this is not referring to a subscript. This 4 is referring to the charge of the ion. This has to be a +4 or 4+ ion. Okay, let's do a few more examples of this. All right, so let's look at this compound, Fe2 parentheses SO4 parentheses 3. So we check our first element. It is iron. We look for iron on the periodic table, and it is a D block element. So it is not in group 1, it's not in group 2, it is not part of the slide, so we need a Roman numeral. All right, so step 1, we write the name. So this is iron. We leave empty parentheses so we can figure out what the charge is. And then SO4, this is a polyatomic ion. Go to your chart and see what the name of that is. And when you do that, you find out that is sulfate. Okay, our next step, we're going to box the formula unit. This 2 means we have 2 iron ions. So we have Fe plus something and another Fe plus something. This 3 means we have 3 sulfate ions, SO4, SO4, SO4. And from our chart, we see that our sulfate has a 2- charge. We box our formula. Now, we set the whole thing equal to 0. We're always going to know what the sum of the negative charges are because we know what our negative ions are. So 2, 4, 6, we have a -6. That means the sum of the positive ions have to be a +6. But we have 2 ions here that have to add up to +6, so that means each one has to be a +3. So this is what goes into our parentheses, the charge of each ion. So this compound, the name is iron Roman numeral 3 sulfate. And you might think you can just cross up the charges backwards of what we did yesterday, but if you go back to this previous example, that does not work. That does not work. You won't get lead 4 sulfide. All right, let's do another example of this, and we will do SnCl2. Okay, so we look at where Sn is on the periodic table. That's tin. That is a P block metal. So it is not in group 1, it is not in group 2, it's not part of the slide, so that means it must have a Roman numeral in the name. So tin, open parentheses, Cl, that's the chloride ion. All right, now we box our formula. So we have an Sn plus something, and we have 2 chloride ions. Charge of chloride is -1, and we have 2 of them. So that is all that is in our formula unit, those 3 ions. Set the whole thing equal to 0. -1 and -1 is -2. The positive charge has to equal +2. There's only 1 tin ion, so this tin has to be a +2. So it is tin, Roman numeral 2, chloride. And that's it. All right, let's do one more. Okay, so Cu3PO4. So again, we check our first element. Copper is a D block element. It's not in group 1, it's not in group 2, it's not part of the slide, so we must have a Roman numeral. So Cu is copper, Copper, open parentheses, PO4, polyatomic ion. Check your chart to get the name. And we see that this is phosphate. Okay, now we're going to box the formula. We're going to put the individual ions that are in our formula unit. So we have 3 copper ions plus something. That's what we're figuring out, what they are. And we have 1 We don't have the parentheses. You can put it in if you'd like to. We have one PO4 ion, and we have to check our chart, so we have to have the right charge, and our chart tells us that this is 3 minus. Here is our box, and we set it equal to 0. We only have one negative ion. It's got a 3 minus charge, so that's minus 3. So that means that our positive charges have to add up to, this is minus 3, they have to add up to plus 3. There's 3 of them, so each has to be a plus 1. So our formula is copper Roman numeral 1 phosphate. Now, I said that when we have subscripts that are 1s, we don't need them. However, you must have the Roman numeral, even if it's a 1, when you have a beginning metal that's not in group 1, group 2, or the slide. So when you're doing these problems, first thing you want to do, check what that first element is. If it's in group 1, group 2, the slide, if it's NH4 or H, then it's easy. You don't have to worry about a Roman numeral. If otherwise, though, the first element is not in group 1, 2, 3, or the slide, then you're going to have to figure out that Roman numeral.